Morning, everyone. I thought, seeing as we didn't have any questions from yesterday's lesson, that we could just have a look at a few pages today. I am going to try and keep the lesson shorter than we had yesterday. I know that yesterday was a bit of a marathon affair for you because there was so much background information and preparation and so forth. But from now on, I'll try to keep our lessons to around about 15 minutes so that you've got time to assimilate the information that I give you. I really would appreciate some feedback from you, even if it's not to ask questions, but just to say, yes, this is working, or no, it's not, or please go faster or slower, or something to that effect. This method of teaching is as new to me as the method of learning is to you. So I really am in uncharted waters here, and I'd really appreciate some feedback to know whether it's working for you or not, and how we can adapt it to make it better and a better learning experience for you. So to continue with where we left off yesterday, we're picking up on page 8, where the last quote that we looked at was Basil saying, I have put too much of myself into it, and that was with reference to the painting. And we then get Henry's response. And I'm going to just read a couple of paragraphs down, and then we'll have a look at it. He says, too much of yourself in it. Upon my word, Basil, I didn't know you were so vain, and I really can't see any resemblance between you with your rugged, strong face and your coal-black hair and this young Adonis, who looks as if he was made out of ivory and rose leaves. And it's a fairly lengthy paragraph, and from there on I'm going to just point out a couple of salient quotes from it. But I want to just point out two things. One is what we learn of Henry, where he immediately goes to physical appearance in his comparison between Basil and Dorian. And that is very typical of Henry. He always looks at the superficial. He always looks at outward appearance first, despite the fact that we will see as the novel develops, he has an acute understanding of human nature that he exploits for his own entertainment. Now, just a quick tip to you. There are two mythological characters that are referred to in this paragraph. One is Adonis and the other is Narcissus. Now, if you turn in your texts to page 261, you will see there a very extensive glossary of terms that extends over until page 266. So my advice to you would be to bookmark it for yourself. Just put a sticky note or a bookmark there so that it's easy reference for you when you come across an expression such as these two here, and you can go directly to the glossary and have a look at their meanings. Just for our purposes today, you can find Adonis, the explanation for him on page 261. And then for Narcissus, you can find that explanation on page 264, and you can just read about them. You very likely have heard of Narcissus and you know his story. The Adonis you might want to just make reference to for yourselves. A couple of lines down, Henry continues. He says, but real beauty ends where an intellectual expression begins. Intellect in itself is a mode of exaggeration and destroys the harmony of any face. Now, you will have noticed that I am highlighting anything that makes reference to the Victorian attitudes and life in pink. And this one is highlighted in pink because it really speaks to, again, the superficiality of Victorian society and the idea that for your aristocratic class, it really was all about appearance rather than what was contained within. And again, we see the difference between someone like Henry, who represents your aristocracy, and someone like Basil, where Basil is far more concerned with what lies beneath in a person than their superficial appearance. A few lines down, Henry continues and he says how perfectly hideous they are, except of course in the church. But then in the church, they don't think. Yesterday I mentioned how the attitudes in religion had changed, and we see an indication of this here in this line, the whole idea that Henry has this view that the church is something, an institution that dictates learnt behavior, and that it is mindless and has no real bearing on real life. And you'll see that attitude within him picks up later on. Then if you turn to the top of page 9, we see Basil. And these few pages that we're going to have a look at today really explore Basil and Henry's characters, and we leave Dorian Gray aside for a couple of pages. And here we have Basil's philosophy. And for those of you who have read the novel, there is a very clear indication of foreshadowing in this paragraph. So we're going to pick up in the paragraph that starts with the lines, "You don't understand me, Harry," and we're going to pick up about 6 lines into that paragraph. He says, "It is better not to be different from one's fellows. The ugly and the stupid have the best of it in this world. They can sit at their ease and gape at the play. If they know nothing of victory, they are at least spared the knowledge of defeat. They live as we all should live, undisturbed, indifferent, and without disquiet. They neither bring ruin upon others, nor ever receive it from alien hands. Your rank and wealth, Harry, my brains, such as they are, my art, whatever it may be worth, Dorian Gray's good looks, we shall all suffer for what the gods have given us, suffer terribly." And of course the foreshadowing there is the idea of Basil suffering terribly because of this beautiful piece of art that he has created in Dorian Gray's portrait. So there's Basil's philosophy of life. He doesn't want to be in the limelight. He doesn't want to be noticed because he recognizes in it some sort of a responsibility. And you will know for yourselves, if you consider celebrities who have fallen from grace, how much greater their fall is than for your average person in the street. Think of, for example, the Oscar Pistorius trial, Tiger Woods some years ago, the Paris Hilton, and any other celebrities who have had a fall from grace. We know that it becomes world knowledge, everybody talks about it, and they do suffer terribly. In the next paragraph, we pick up on something of Henry's character, and it is at this point that I want to introduce the idea of the sociopath to you. And I want you, as this chapter and the next chapter in particular develop, to look out for the predatory quality in Henry as a character. It's almost as if he has been alerted to something in Dorian Gray that appeals to him, and he's like a predator whose ears have pricked up and he's caught the scent of something that he's going to track down. So in this next paragraph, he's alerted immediately to the name. Remember that Basil had wanted to keep the name a secret. He didn't want to share it with Basil because with Henry, because he knows Henry's predatory nature and he doesn't want him to spoil Dorian. And so we see here the alert in Henry. Dorian Gray Is that his name?" asked Lord Henry, walking across the studio towards Basil Hallward. "Can you see that he's on the alert now? His interest has been piqued, his curiosity is piqued, and he wants to track her down." Basil's response, "Yes, that is his name. I didn't intend to tell it to you." Henry asks him why not, and Basil fobs him off. He makes light of it, but we see at the end of the chapter that he recognizes the predator in Henry, and he wants to protect Dorian and, to some extent, himself. And so Basil plays it down, but Lord Henry picks up on it, and we see his hypocrisy in his interpretation of marriage. So we're picking it up over the page where he says, "Not at all," answered Lord Henry, "not at all, my dear Basil. You seem to forget that I am married, and the one charm of marriage is that it makes a life of deception absolutely necessary for both parties." And he goes on to describe how he and his wife have an open marriage, if you want to call it that, where both of them seem to have liaisons with people outside of marriage, and neither of them seems too concerned by it. But we also learn later, of course, that Henry and his wife do get divorced. Basil, on the other hand, doesn't believe Henry, and in the next paragraph he says, "I believe that you are really a very good husband, but that you are thoroughly ashamed of your own virtues. You are an extraordinary fellow. You never say a moral thing, and you never do a wrong thing. Your cynicism is simply a pose." And I want you just to store that in your memories. It's a question that we'll answer at a later stage, whether this is a pose on Henry's part, or really whether he is just a superficial cynic as the novel develops. And then I want to pick up at the bottom of page 10, where we get from Basil his perception of art. So Henry pushes him again to give a proper explanation as to why he won't exhibit the picture. And he answers thus. He says, "Harry," said Basil, looking him straight in the face, "every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter. It is rather the painter who on the coloured canvas reveals himself. The reason I will not exhibit this picture is that I am afraid that I have shown in it the secret of my own soul." So again, we end on a very similar sentiment as we did yesterday. It's really, really important that you put one of those two quotes by Basil about the painting revealing his own soul as a quote to learn. It's one of or either of them are two of the most important quotes in the novel. And then just to close this lesson, paragraph 6, page 11, we see the predator alerted again in Henry in his response. He says, "Lord Henry smiled and leaning down plucked a pink-petaled daisy from the grass and examined it." So there he is again, this idea that he's alerted, he's fascinated by this idea of Dorian Gray, and that he's going to use it at some stage. In the next paragraph, the last line of that paragraph, he says, "Lord Henry felt as if he could hear Basil Hallward's heart beating and wondered what was coming." There's the predator. He's curious. His senses have been alerted. So in our next lesson, we're going to have a look at that and explore that as we hear Dorian Gray's and Basil's meeting unfolded. So that's a very short lesson for today. Have a look at it. Send me any questions later in the day that I can answer, and we'll continue on Thursday. Have a good day. Thanks.